In my house, if we didn't have library cards, we wouldn't have to pay for overdue books. We'd probably save something. Let's give him another hand. Come on. Welcome here. I hope you've been having a little bit of fun. We're dealing with a subject tonight of dealing to debt and the freedom from debt. I'd love to say that, none of us needs to have any debt ever. And maybe we could come to that. But I want to just look at something to make us aware of how powerful debt can be. I can't remember what the date was. It was just several weeks ago, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, I found this newspaper article. Debtor drowned the developer, jury was told. Somebody who owed huge amounts of money couldn't cope anymore with it, so we're told that an Auckland property developer was found bound and gagged and thrown to her death in a stream by a former contractor who owed her money, the jury was told yesterday. What an awful situation. But if we're going to be real, the power of debt is so great that that's the kind of ending it can have. It drives people to distraction, it destroys marriages, it destroys friendships and relationships. It destroys every bit of self-worth that some people have. And it's all because of debt. And when you really look at it, if you look at it honestly, you'll notice that debt is a very small word. Big up on the screen there, but it's a short word. And yet, this small word, if you think about it, is actually, it's one of the only things that is ominous when you have lots of it. Anything else you have lots of, it's great. But debt, you don't want lots of it, amen? I'm tempted to ask you people here tonight, how many people are in debt? I'm not going to do that. I would never do that to you. Hate somebody to do that to me, but can you just put it on yourself for a moment? Just think, what debt do I owe right now? What kind of debt do I have? And so we need to ask a question. I mean, some of you are probably sitting there thinking, oh no, here comes the debt thing, and I'm going to feel bad, really, really bad. And if they do really well, I'm going to feel extraordinarily bad. And we don't want you to do that tonight. We want you to go away with quite a different worldview. Let's ask this question. Is debt actually wrong? Is it wrong? No. Debt is not wrong. Let me just say one or two things about it. See, the first thing I want to say tonight, when we ask the question, is debt wrong? I want to make it clear, I'm not saying never ever borrow. I couldn't sustain that. I couldn't sustain that myself, and I don't think anybody can. In fact, would you like to know this? It might make you feel real good, but I don't want you to feel too good about it. Right, so be careful. Don't get carried away with this one. But you see, debt is, the whole business of lending, which leads people to debt, is a legitimate industry okayed by God. It's pretty clear. I mean, I can show you numerous verses out of the Bible, numerous verses, which support it. In fact, can I show you this just for a moment, just so you get some idea? There, 3.5 pages worth of small type, all about debt. It's all in the Bible. It's there. It talks about it. And it's not all negative. There are some negative points there, but it's not. You see, lending is a legitimate industry okayed by God. And so let's feel good about debt at the moment, but not too good. Because there's another side to the whole deal, you see. And then we ask that question, is debt wrong? And we're saying no. But I want to suggest this. But avoiding it as much as possible will leave you in a better position long term as a person. And who doesn't want to be in a better position long term? I think most of us here would far rather that we didn't have to carry debt. But the reality is we need a house to live in or whatever. And, in terms of loaning for a house, is it okay to do that? Some people have asked me over the years, is it okay to do that? Of course it is. Why pay thousands and thousands of dollars over your life for somebody else to own a house and make a profit out of you? Why not own the house yourself? That takes the fact that you're going to have to enter some kind of debt for most of us here, in reality. So why is debt a problem? Exactly why is debt actually really a problem? Well, there's some issues that we face. Human nature is such that we are people who are actually what you call hedonistic by nature. In other words, we want more. We will go to get more and more and more. And you see, the truth of the matter is, people place priorities on material things, cars, electronics, equipment, loan sharks, and boy, oh boy, I don't know whether you've noticed it like me, but at my post office box, they somehow or other got my name. I asked about it, and apparently they probably got off the electoral roll. And I keep getting these finance companies offering me money at a cheaper rate than everybody else, but it's not. And quite frankly, I wouldn't go near them. And the reasons why I wouldn't go near them, because you've got to think about this. You need to work through some things, and all of us need to do that. You see, if you really look at it, hedonism in itself is actually really an expression of independence. I am going to have what I want, when I want, how I want, where I want. And it's kind of, you see this little illustration of a guy who's like the mice that runs in the cage, in your mouse cage if you have a mouse. My daughter, I won't say which one, she had a mouse. She wasn't meant to have a mouse in the house, but she had a mouse. You heard her laugh now, so she's given herself away. And I was always fascinated when I was young to go to the pet shops, and you see in the mouse cages these little spinning wheels, and they get in the things. The hamsters are just the same, guinea pigs, and they'll get in these things and they'll run, and they'll run and they'll run. And the thing is, you're running forever and getting nowhere, and that's exactly what debt's like. You're running, and sometimes the more you run, the harder you run on the debt thing, the worse it gets, and it gets to a point where then I'm exhausted. We need to recognize that it's actually not good for us. And then to complicate things, I want to suggest something that won't be popular with some people, but that's fine. If you look at it, this guy's trying to carry a load of debt. He thinks he's got the light, and the reality is that in our society, our political system is designed in such a way, and it is designed with intention, that it is denying people the opportunity to live a life that isn't dominated by money. That isn't dominated by money. Now, let's face it. Nobody lives without it. And we saw with the credit cards here just how much it means. Actually, they've left one or two here. I could sort of... Not really, I better not, I'd be in trouble. Pretty boy shop, that amused me highly. Let's think about this for a moment. I found an illustration which I've modified to my own design here. There's a little bit of a cartoon thing. You see, noting the popularity of all those colourful bracelets for good causes, Mr. Money decides to borrow the idea. You know, the bracelets, the little bracelets that people wear? In the Christian world, it's WWJD. What would Jesus do? People look at them and ask themselves. And you see some people with several of these coloured bracelets on with letters on them. I've got some suggestions for some debt ones that you could actually have, you see. But let's have a look at it. And it says here, I need glasses, don't I? Hey, wear debt shackles, it says. and wear them proud. So let's have a look at some of the debt shackles we might like to have. This one says, get more quick. How would you like that one? What about the next one? Have now, pay later. I mean, look at it. I mean, how many adverts you see on TV that says this thing? Have now, pay later. In a year's time, you don't have to pay any interest for a whole year. What about this next one? Go for gold. You know? What about the next one? Have fun with more. That's the message we get. Use your card, get more, have fun, go overseas, travel. Then WWJND, what's that for? What would Jesus not do? I think that's a new debt thing, you know? What about this next one? GMM, anybody like to guess? Well, almost right. Give me more. Get more money. Well, let's give her a hand. Come on, yeah. Took a risk. Just as good, wasn't it? What about this? I owe you, and you, and you, and you, and you, and you. And the last one. More for more stress. You know? Get more into debt, get more for more stress. That's the way it can go for all of us. You know, the reality is that that's the bracelets we're wearing. Yes, they may be invisible, but for some of us, we're wearing them. And see, if you look at it, you need to be aware of the fact that they're really asking us, some of these people who love us to get into debt because they make money out of it. It says this, decorate yourself with debt. We're saddling you with it for the rest of your life. We thought we'd make it fun. Well, it's kind of sad because it's not much fun, really, is it? So I want to look at some things. The first thing is, recognize unhealthy debt destroys. I'd like the guys to drop the lights just for a moment. We're going to watch something. It came from Campbell Live some time ago. Let's just listen and watch it.
To try and bring Terry in from the financial wilderness, it was time for a little chat with a financial advisor.
G'day Terry, how are you?
Oh, I'm pretty good, how are you?
Good.
The news wasn't good.
Well Terry, I've had a look at your situation here and I wonder if you know how long it would take you to actually pay these cards off. The bad news is that if you made the minimum payments on the first card, it's going to take you something over 20 years to pay the balance off. If we turn to the second card, you've got the interest rate's a bit lower and the minimum payment's actually a bit higher. I think it would take 8.5 years to pay the card off.
I'm not an addict though.
That's if he doesn't use the cards ever again. And just think of the interest Terry is paying to the banks.
Oh dear.
Here's a quick example. If you spend $100 on one of your cards and your interest rate is 19, 20%, and if you don't pay it off, then after a year you've given one of these to the banks.
It all adds up. Terry's $5,000 debt on just one card at 19.95% after 10 years will cost him $8,000 in interest. After 20 years, he'll have paid $13,500. Terry could slash this figure by changing to a lower interest credit card. The lowest on the market is 10.95%. Do the figures and after 10 years, the interest would be just $3,000. And after 20 years, it only goes up another $800. A saving of almost $10,000. That's a holiday in a luxury
Hotel. $10,000. I was showing somebody here, somebody happened to walk in on me while I was doing the preparation on Friday. And they were stunned when they realised how much money they were paying for the vehicle. I said to them, when you're paying for a vehicle, if you pay over a number of years, it's possible to actually pay twice the value of the vehicle and more in some cases. It's horrible. I mean, how much did he have? Did he borrow on his card in the first place? $5,000. How much debt was there? $8,000. That was $8,000 interest rather. That's you know, and on the other card, a similar type of situation. $10,000 that he never had to pay if he'd been a bit wiser. That's huge. And most of you, if you had $10,000, what would you do with it? you might blow it. We would hope you wouldn't. But I remember some years ago where a situation was just like that. You see, the thing is, it's like we saw portrayed so clearly today, we should never allow the trap of a lifestyle of debt to be the way that we live. Because we can have debt without making it a lifestyle. It's okay to have some debt, but to make it a lifestyle is awful, and in the end, it's destructive. Some of you here, I'm very aware of the fact that you're facing debt because you got into a relationship that went very messy and the other person took off and left you with debt. And that's kind of sad, but what it actually really says is that you need to be wise about any debt you incur. One of the sad things that happens is that when people are facing difficulties in their relationships, some people, and quite a high percentage of them, tend to go to try and rescue the relationship and spend. And it just ends up in further debt and further mess and further stress. And it destroys the relationship. So debt is a powerful cycle. The second thing I'd like to look at is to recognise unhealthy debt actually robs us. And once again, Campbell Life on a different night. We actually had twice this week, and I tried to get a copy and we missed getting the copy of it. But Good Morning had a thing on debt, and so did Fair Go this week. Debt has become a real high-level subject on television at the moment. So let's have a look at this little extract. This is taken from a guy who wrote a book, the name of which is eluding me right now, but it'll come. There we go. Let's have a look. Let's drop the lights.
Well, there's a massive survey evidence and other evidence now which demonstrates that even though we're richer than we've ever been personally and as a nation, we're actually no happier, measured, for example, by surveys of life satisfaction, but also the evidence is all around us. For example, the epidemics of psychological disorders. You know, depression in the United States, and it's similar in Australia and I dare say in New Zealand, is at a rate 10 times higher than after the Second World War. The economists and the politicians have been promising us for decades that if only we can focus on increasing the rate of GDP, that is expanding the economy as fast as we can, we'll reach some sort of nirvana. But it seems that the opposite is the case. If you ask most people whether people are happier now than, say, their grandparents were in the early 1950s, they say no.
You see, see what it's actually being said. This is an expert who's written a book, and it's become a well-recognised book on the whole subject of debt. He's written in Australia, and he talks about the fact that people are actually not only not happier, but they're less happy than they were because they're accrual of debt. There's a massive expansion of debt happening. And so we need to be aware of that. It's not going to make us happier. It's going to make us sadder. So let's recognise it's going to rob us of what we can be if we allow ourselves to get into horrible problems with debt. You see, what he was actually saying, that we are richer than we have ever been, and yet we are no happier. It's kind of like this anchor. You can't get up and balance on a surfboard when you are carrying around the anchor of debt around your feet. You can't get on the surfboard. You can't ride the waves of life, in other words, is what he's saying. It keeps dragging you down. You will not be able to turn and live lean if you have to earn a basic income just to keep your head above water, because the anchor of debt is dragging you under. And I think that's a very helpful thought for us. So let's ask a question that might be really helpful. How can we get freedom from it? How can we get freedom from debt? Not necessarily total freedom, but freedom from the kind of oppressive nature of debt. Book of Proverbs says these words very clearly to us. Probably find the book of Proverbs in the Bible. It's an amazing book with all sorts of statements about all sorts of aspects of life and worth a good read. If you are wise, your wisdom will reward you. If you are a mocker, you alone will suffer. Now, what is it actually saying to us? Actually, if you are wise, you will actually feel really good about things. You'll be rewarded. But if you mock the fact that, I'll be all right, things will be fine and dandy and I don't need to worry, that's actually, without us realising it, we're mocking our own state even. And I'd like to suggest that if you're wise, you're actually going to be rewarded and you'll enjoy your life a hang of a lot more. I can say one thing, and I want to say this really clearly publicly. My wife, who's just slipping out, she must have known. My wife has always been the best money manager in our home. In fact, we had a bit of a sense of humour happening in the church some time ago when we ended up with a situation where the Cannon Street School here needed a treasurer. I was in the meeting for the school and I got asked to be the treasurer, and I thought, oh man, I don't want to do this. But I went out of the meeting. I said, look, I need to go out and have a talk with God first. And so I went out in the school grounds and had a wander around for a while. I said, I won't okay it until I come back to the meeting. So I wandered around for a while and talked to God, and I felt God was saying, go and do it. Oh, this is crazy. I knew it was going to happen when I got home. I got home and I told my wife I've just become the treasurer at Cannon Street School. She sat there and she laughed. She seriously laughed. Well, that was okay. Because, see, she's really good at it. Now, I actually did a good job of it because I had the support of a woman who was actually a leader in the church here with us, and we saw some good things happen as a consequence. But the thing is, you actually do need to use a little bit of wisdom. That means you've got to get the wisdom, and most of us don't have it naturally. And I want to suggest that my wandering around in the schoolyard there, and they all knew, I mean, most of them were not followers of Jesus Christ, and that doesn't worry me. I mean, I'd love them to be, obviously, but that's the way it is. But they respected that, and they respected my wishes to go away and spend some time with God and come back into the meeting a little later. But at the end of the day, I think we do need to stop and to think. And my recommendation is when you're trying to work through things, talking to God's really helpful. Some of you may not have been used to doing that. I find when I'm facing issues about debt and expenditure and things, it's the most helpful thing. And we've seen some amazing stuff happen. We have lived in our life, most of our married life, we've been in pastoral ministry 27 years. We lived on reduced income, and sometimes in some churches, no income from the church. And we've gotten down to 50 cents in the bank. But we've never been in a state where we're so much in debt we're in trouble. And you know, right now I think we owe a little wee bit of money to Pauline's mother. She's been kind enough to help us with something, but it was just not a great amount, and we're living within our budget and constraints, and I think that's important. See, if you're wise, you're actually going to feel rewarded. You're going to feel good about yourself, but when you get yourself in horrible debt, one of the worst things I find when giving people budget advice is the depressing nature, the depressing effect of debt on people. And we'd like you to be a bit free from that. So the first thing I'd like to suggest, if you're in debt and you're finding it hard to cope, it's important to deal with the problem straight away. Don't leave it. One of the most common things with people getting into debt is that they keep procrastinating. They keep putting off the day they deal with the problem. And that is one of the biggest causes of deeper debt. It's actually bigger than the expenditure for some people. They get further and further into debt, not keeping up their payments. They get into a state where they don't address stuff straight away. And people have been surprised sometimes when I've sat down with them and we've looked at their debt, we've looked at their situation, and we've written 1 or 2 letters to people they owe money to, and we've said we can only pay this amount, and if they don't, if they could be kind enough to stop the increase of the interest right at this point, that would be helpful. But if they don't stop the interest, on some occasions I've written in a letter that if the interest continues the way it is, the person will go into bankruptcy and they won't receive any money. Well, I'd rather receive their money back at least. But I think if you're a follower of Jesus Christ, you do owe them some interest, and I think that's a thing you should do. But the thing is, you can't afford to put it off, because the longer you leave it, the worse it gets. See, the longer you ignore your debts, the worse the situation becomes. I've already said it, so I already had it on the paper, forgot that. Never mind. Let's charge on. If you can't stop it, my suggestion, seriously, I really suggest you really do cut it. You know, I really would like to do this, Derek, No, I bet not. You see, the truth of the matter is that you know, if you find yourself in a serious situation and you just cannot stop using the card, get rid of it. Cut it up. I'm serious. Society didn't live with credit cards in the old days, although they did have some credit devices. And so I'd like you to think for a moment. Get rid of the cards. Just say you haven't got any cards. Think about it for a moment. Think really hard and ask yourself a question. Before credit was a choice, what would you do? Before credit was a choice, what would you actually do? Think about it. In our society, there's a term that used to be used, that's still used, but it's used by critics of the debt systems that are in our society. It's not used very much by the ordinary average person, and yet it was a thing that was used by the ordinary average person for years and years and hundreds of years, a thing that's called delayed gratification. What it means that you know what you're trying to get, but you're willing to work towards that thing to get it and to wait for it, not to have to demand it right now. But we're an instant society, instant coffee, instant everything. I mean, ludicrous, they even make instant tea. I thought tea was pretty instant and awful already, but never mind. They've improved on the awfulness. You see, one of the things that we know with this delayed gratification thing is that the rich rule over the poor and the borrower is servant to the lender. You need to be really aware of this. It actually helps motivate some people to say, well, I'm not going to be a servant to anybody, but if you're in debt, you are. So if you don't want to be a servant, guess what you have to do? Work away at getting out of that horrible debt. Now, I'm not saying, once again, I want to restate, I'm not saying don't owe money on a house or you may need a decent car, and I'd recommend that you don't go around buying heaps of junk, except if you're like me and you can repair them, because it can cost you more than it's worth. You need to be really aware of what you're doing. And there's things, there's processes you can go through. And I don't want to try and go into all the nuts and bolts of that tonight. But it's just to help us to be aware. You know, delayed gratification is far, far more fulfilling than to have the thing right now. Did you know that? There are things that I've set myself to achieve and to have one day. And it took years and years in some situations to get that thing, but I end up having that thing and owing no man anything on that thing. That's why I have a lathe. That's why I have some of the other things I have. Delayed gratification is a healthy thing to have. The second thing I think is really helpful for us is that we actually don't covet what your neighbour has. This is a helpful step towards not getting into debt. And one of the things that drives us, the neighbour gets the latest boat if you're living in a wealthy area. So you have to have a nice boat. Hey, Tangi. No. She was grinning at me, so or let's put it this way. Around here, one of the intriguing things I've noticed over the last 20 years, and some of you I'm sure noticed, when I came here, there was only a little handful of cars in this church. We need a car park. And yes, the numbers have increased. But there was one car per family if the family had a car, and many families didn't. And one of the first things I did was help families get cars without getting into horrible debt. It was one of my early projects here, to show people what you could actually achieve, what you could actually do. And we did that. I remember one family, the Kiripatias, who ended up with this car and actually doubled the value of their pocket a year after they had, or actually more than a year after they had bought this car that we'd managed to get through a little sort of circumventus route, honest route. And when they went and resold it, we paid $1,600 for it, spent $52 getting it on the road, and they traded in for $3,000 a year and a bit later, whatever it was. Those kind of things are there, but if they had wanted to have what their neighbour had, we would have been in trouble. Because around here, just after that period of time, people started buying more and more expensive cars. So if you lived next to Pat Tiatia, you'd look at her car and you'd want one just like hers. She was very fortunate to have a car. But what most people didn't know is that Pat had the boss's car until she was the boss, really. She put a sticker on the side. That ruined the whole thing at that point. But around here, one of the things that's happened is that numerous young guys have got cars with sound systems in them that when they drive past, this whole building reverberates. Now, what it does, I feel the building, it's pulsing. And you know what it's saying to me when they're driving past? Can you imagine? Debt, 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 debt. That's what it's all about. Because the other guy had one that went, you see, the other guy, he had a car that went debt, 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 debt. So he sees it and he covets what his neighbour's got and he's, oh, of course he's got to get slightly better. So next one, debt, 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 debt. So the guy who lives down the road from him, who happens to know him, thinks, man, he's got a nice car. I would like one like his. So he goes, and when he goes, of course he can't resist. He can't get one exactly the same with exactly the same sound system, and he gets it different. And when he drives down the road, it's dad, 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 dad. And you hear it drive past here. Oh, no kidding. The building reverberates. That's because we are driven by this need to have. We're driven by it. And in actual fact, it's really interesting. One of the earliest warnings in the Bible was not to covet what others have. And I wasn't to say, you shall not covet what the others have, which is a way that some people come across with it. It was actually God really showing interest in us and saying, if you do this kind of thing, then you're going to face some trauma in life. And my advice is follow this piece of advice and you'll be a lot happier. But man never did it. That included the woman. You know? So, don't covet what your neighbour has. And on top of it, think creatively. If you want something, what can you do to get it? You don't need to go and work long hours and make your family miss out. I know, I've been around to some of your houses, and you're just like me. There's a lot of junk you could sell, and you could probably get a lot more money for it than you think it's worth. I'm not saying anything. She just delivered a whole pile here today. Well, Robin did on her behalf. Moved into a smaller house. There's not enough room for all the stuff. That's the way we live, isn't it? So, don't covet, because it'll actually help us, because it keeps a right attitude, a right spirit in us. The next one that I want us to look at is to do this, is to plan. I mean, seriously, plan. I mean, seriously, plan and plan and plan and plan. Don't just live on the whim. If you're going to plan, that means you've got to do something really constructive to do it. You can't sit there and go, oh, yes, I've got it, I've planned it. I tell you what, if your head's anything like mine, in an hour's time you will have forgotten what you got. What you need to do is you need to sit down and be very intentional about what you're doing and work out what money you've got and what money you can use and how you can use it wisely, and you need a budget to do it. Now, we're not going to go into details of a budget here tonight, except to say that there are people in our community who are available to help people with setting a budget. It would be helpful. So we need to plan. And you need to think about how much you're earning, how much is needed, and you need to think about your holidays and what you're going to need for that. You need to think about Christmas time and how wise you're going to be about that. You need to think about all these things. Amen? And then the next one. This one's exciting. You know, Pauline and I, and you might think this is an insulting term, but I love it. We're freeloaders. The banks don't like us. Because what Pauline is a technical term the banks use. The banks don't like us because what my wife does, and she's great at this, the day before, sometimes a little bit before that, she pays all the debt off the credit card so we don't pay any interest. And you can do that. If you're wise enough about your expenditure, if you're going to have a credit card, use it within your budget, by all means, but pay it off so you don't pay any interest. Now, if you look at the interest rates you were looking at earlier there, you save yourself a lot of money over 20 years, thousands and thousands of dollars. So it's worth doing. Be a freeloader. You want to be a freeloader? Yeah, some of you do. You have to get permission from your wife, Robin. All right. Okay, spend within your income and pay your credit card debt every month, in other words. So you can do that. You can plan. If you plan well, you can do that. The next one, sacrifice to pay your debt off quickly. If you have a debt on a house, don't just accept, and make sure if you buy a house, don't get into a contract that's going to allow you flexibility. There are some contracts that are very strict, and they don't allow you flexibility to pay off faster. Don't get involved in those contracts. They're not good. You want to be able to get into a place where you can actually pay off quickly any debt you have, not just against the house, but any debt. The faster you pay it off, the less interest you pay, and the better off you are. In fact, there's an interesting thing in the Old Testament, in the Bible. There's an interesting one. And I think we should bring in it as a rule at the government, but I don't think our Prime Minister will accept this rule. Here's the rule that used to be in the Old Testament. It says, at the end of every 7 years, you must cancel debts. That's what it says. Imagine that. And then in verse, I think it's 19 of the same passage, 9 of the same passage, it says, and when you're giving when you're lending money, don't sit there thinking, oh, it's almost come up for the 7-year thing, because they did it rotationally, and it was a certain date that they did this thing. 7-year thing's coming up, and if I give them the money now, they might not pay me, or so I'm not giving them a loan. It says, loan it. And at the 7-year point, you forgive them the debt, if you're wealthy. And if you have loaned money. That's a scary thought, but, it's not just about that thing in actual fact. It's actually something far, far deeper. What it's actually talking about is a principle with intent. The intent is that you don't want people to be burdened in your community who you love, who you care for, to be so burdened with debt that it becomes destructive to their families, destructive to the community, and therefore destructive overall. And so a community that really, truly loves each other is going to forgive debt. And then ask this question of yourself. Ask this question. Where is my treasure? Whereabouts is my treasure? And if you look at it like this, if you ask this question, where is my treasure? You find the words that we had kindly read out here earlier tonight by Anne. One man gives freely, yet gains even more. Another withholds unduly, but comes to poverty. It's true. I've found a principle in my life that I think God really loves us to do. That if I give freely, I end up even better off than I was. It's a strange set of circumstances, but it's just the way God set up the world, and we don't understand it because it doesn't make logical sense. If you give away $10, it's $10 gone. But the scripture very clearly says, you give away freely, and what happens? You gain even more. Another person withholds unduly, but they end up coming to poverty. So you've got to be careful on this balance thing, because so many people say, oh, I'm going to keep myself out of debt, and so they hold everything close to them, and I'm not going to share. Well, that's not healthy community. In actual fact, one of the things I've discovered, the more I share, the more the community shares. And that doesn't just apply here. It happens in community around us, people in this community that have, when I was attacked a few years ago, my head was smashed in. One of the things that powerfully touched my wife, myself, and our children was the way that the school at Queen Margaret cared for us as a family, with flowers and all sorts of things, and offer a counsel for our girls. The 84 people that tried to contact us, mostly from people who lived around this area, many of them came bearing little gifts, many of them gifts that they'd handmade or letters. We had given freely over the years, and boy, were we rewarded in a way that you just couldn't believe. And it's so powerful. You see, if we're looking at a heavenly treasure, and I want to suggest that's the kind of treasure we want to invest in, not just in something for this earth. If we want to invest long term, it's going to be heavenly. And so let's have a look at what that means. The first thing is, a heavenly treasure will be something that has moved us in the past in a positive way. And something that God's done for us has moved us in the past for some of us here. Some of us haven't had that experience yet. Or maybe you've had it, but you've not seen beyond that first step. The second thing is they have value for the present. I mentioned this morning here in the church with the Christian community here that one of the unique things is that Jesus kept saying, behold, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. It's right here with us right now. We can experience it. And when we're investing in God's kingdom, heavenly treasure, when we're giving to others with generosity, or to God with generosity, then there's value in the present for us, for every one of us. But more importantly, I think, in the end, that their qualities, heavenly treasures, are valid for the future. That we can experience and share in the future with God. Amen? So I want to finish with the last 3 slides. And I want to suggest this. If you're a person who's struggling with debts, and they may seem impossible to manage, they're not. It's possible to solve problems. It's only money. It's only finance. It's not as big or as important as it seems to be. We use it. If we didn't have it, we'd find some other way of trading it. And there's ways of working through these kinds of issues. And I'd like to suggest, if you're going to, that there's ways to get out of that debt that you may need to investigate, but you've got to do some work towards it. You can't just passively say, I'm going to get out of debt and I'm going to pay it off. You've got to be proactive. And when you're thinking about it, you can look at this whole thing. What is life after debt like? This poor guy's in debt and he's singing, what's life after debt like? I'm in awful debt. What's it going to be like? Well, there's only one thing I can explain it to me, is the word freedom. Incredible freedom. We live, personally, my wife and myself, live with that freedom. But it'll never stop us giving. It'll never stop us sharing. We sang a song earlier tonight, and I thought, oh, crumbs. We sang a song, and we used a term that some of you may not have been familiar with, redeemed. We don't sort of always use those kind of songs, except if we give an explanation. We hadn't done that, but I sat there and I thought, you know, one of the neat things about when you're in debt and you get to the end of it, and you paid your last payment, you're redeemed. It's finished. It's over. It's done. That's what redemption means. It means to be set free. Some of you will have seen this film, Shawshank Redemption. And the journey that the guys went through in the prison. Young Negro man who got himself into a horrible situation. Black American, as they call them nowadays. Worked through a painful journey. Managed to escape through all sorts of skullduggery and that. But the reality is, well, his friend did, managed to escape. But the reality is, once the Negro guy paid for his crime, he was free. And once we've paid for debt, we're free. And if you're going to do it, it means you've got to do something about it. And we were singing this song that we're redeemed. We're free from any debt. And the Bible says, oh, no man any debt except the debt of love. Paul talks about in the book of Romans. To love one another. And I want to suggest tonight as we finish that the only debt we need to owe is a debt to God, and the other one we can pay off. Any money ones or whatever. I'd like to suggest that we can live a lot freer life, and if you look around the Christian community, I can say one thing for certain. In the Christian community, there's a huge number of people who have a thing that's called redemption lift. In other words, they've become Christians in a short time, even though they're giving more money away to God. In a relatively short period of time, they start to have things and own things they never had before. Why does that happen? Because when you're in the midst of God's community, He helps us through every aspect of our life, including how we can manage debt and how we can manage our life. Amen? I'd like to invite you to pray with me right now as we conclude. Lord Jesus, we just want to stop before you right now. And we ask you to Help us to be people who are going to understand how we ought to live. Father, some of us have got debt that we just can't escape from, or we've got debt with houses and things, and that's okay. Lord, some of us have kind of got messed up and we're in deep trouble. And some of us here have even been impacted by really negative responses to our debt. And so we would ask you to help us right now. Help us to see the way through, to be able to plan constructively, to be able to understand the principles that you have for us to live, and not to live without freedom, but to live with it. So guide us, we pray, in Jesus' name. And they all said, Amen. The Lord bless you. Let's give that team a great big hand for the work they did here tonight. You don't always see all the work that goes in the background. You should have seen some of the stuff they had to do for this to happen here. And I just want to commend them for what they did. Lord bless you. Have a great week.